Well, hello, this is Mark Hitchcock, and I'll welcome you to Marking the End Times. This is a show that's designed to help you understand what's happening in our world today in light of Bible prophecy. It's very important to understand our world today, and we don't look at the Bible through current events, but we do look at current events through the lens of the Bible. And we see many things happening in our world today that give us every indication that the coming of Jesus Christ is drawing near. And on today's show, what I want to discuss is a topic that you're seeing everywhere right now. It's front page news for the whole week, and that is the topic of anti-Semitism that's growing in our world today. I'm also going to be answering some subscriber questions, questions about angels in heaven, and also about what happened to people who died before Jesus died on the cross. Where are they, and what happened to them? So we'll answer those questions and some more when we get to the subscriber section here in just a moment. But I want to talk about the topic of anti-Semitism. Again, this has been splashed across front page news everywhere you look this last week. A lot of people don't realize there's been a dramatic rise in anti-Semitism globally. From 2019 to 2021. In fact, U.S. Jewish hate crimes doubled over the previous year in 2021. But again, as most of you know, and I'm sure you've heard if you keep up at all with social media or even watch news outlets, anti-Semitism's kind of exploded here in this last week because of a tweet it all started with a tweet from Kanye West. Now, he's known just now as Ye. But it started with this anti-Semitic tweet that he put out. And it sparked a firestorm. Social media blew up. There was a huge backlash, a lot of immediate fallout from that. Kanye West has lost all kinds of endorsements. He's been marginalized and really criticized heavily for that, which he should be for what he said. I agree with that. But then added to that, Kyrie Irving, who is an NBA basketball player, he plays for the Brooklyn Nets. And he promoted a film on Amazon Prime that contains some kind of anti-Semitic tropes. He tweeted out a link to this movie, which then has sparked the National Basketball Players Association to issue a statement condemning anti-Semitism. And even, Shaquille O'Neal, Shaq was on this week calling Kyrie Irving an idiot. So we're just seeing all kinds of things out there about anti-Semitism in the broader culture. We see it happening in other parts of the country. There was a banner that was hung over the LA freeway that says, Kanye is right. So people are coming in on this on one side or the other. Down at the Georgia-Florida football game in this last week in Jacksonville, Florida, there was a huge flashing anti-Semitic message of support for Kanye West's comments. It was projected outside the TIAA Bank Field in Jacksonville, Florida. It was on the back of the stadium billboard, which again drew all kinds of justified criticism. But what's fascinating is, to me, these kinds of statements are drawing a lot of criticism, which they should. But you have the members of the squad, several members of the U.S. House of Representatives, led by AOC, who basically call Israel's government apartheid and issue all kinds of anti-Semitic statements, really, and go unchallenged often with that. One other thing that's happened recently as well, just on this whole anti-Semitism front that may kind of, I think, went under the radar for many people, is the Presbyterian Church USA. The Presbyterian Church USA is part of the World Council of Churches, which the World Council of Churches has been very anti-Semitic since its inception back in 1948. But the Presbyterian Church USA was the first major denomination back in 2014 to divest any of their investments from anything that would support Israel in any way. They called for boycotts against Israel. They called for sanctions against Israel. And they kind of reversed that in 2016. But this summer now, they've ratcheted up their anti-Semitism. Here's a quote from an article that I read here recently. It says, when it comes to Israel, the PCUSA initially focused on the alleged evils of the occupation. Now its hate has vastly expanded from discussions on withholding military aid from Israel to labeling Israel as an apartheid state. There's a pseudo-theological document that denies the connection between the Jews and the land. So they put out an article saying that they deny any connection between the Jewish people and their homeland that was given to them by God. And it says they've attacked this since the land that Israel's had since biblical times. They also give a moral pass to Palestinian terrorism. But it says PCUSA's fig leaf self-description as supporting both sides in a complex dispute has been dropped, leaving PCUSA's naked anti-Israel worldview on full display. And just one more statement here. It says, over the years, the PCUSA would mourn the destruction in Gaza without mentioning the thousands of rockets launched from Gaza into Israel. Throughout, however, PCUSA was careful not to attack the Jews. At most, it was Zionists who were guilty. But now they're beginning to talk about the Jews and the Israeli regime and all these things. And so the final spiral began this past year and this past summer when they've actually declared Israel to be an apartheid state. So we see really anti-Semitism growing globally, but things like, tweets by Kanye West and these a tweet by Kyrie Irving and some banners that have been placed have kind of brought this front and center in our culture. And anti-Semitism's always present. It's always been present from the beginning, but it bubbles to the surface with greater frequency and intensity as time goes along. And we know today that the Jewish people living in the land of Israel, about 6 million Jews living there, almost half of the Jews now in the world live in Israel today. They're surrounded by a sea of enemies that want to destroy them. This whole issue of anti-Semitism that's kind of come up in our culture here in the last week or so raises a really important question, and that is, why is there anti-Semitism? Why is there this age-long hatred of the Jewish people? You don't see that with any other group. There's no age-long hatred of the Irish or the Italians or the Russians or Germans or any other race or ethnic group. And the reason for this is really simple, and that is that Satan is the ultimate anti-Semite. Satan hates the Jewish people. He hates Israel. You say, well, why does he hate them? Well, he hates them because he hates God, and God has a plan for the Jewish people that started all the way back in the book of Genesis. You remember after the fall of Adam and Eve, God made a promise. It's the first promise, really, the first prophecy ever given in Genesis 3:15. And God promised that one would come, born of the seed of the woman, who would come and crush the head of the serpent. The serpent would bruise his heel, but he would crush the serpent's head. So this is the promise of an ultimate deliverer who would put aside and crush this great antagonist in the world known as Satan. Well, of course, when God makes this promise, Satan immediately is going to be on the lookout for this coming one that God has promised is going to crush his head because he wants to destroy him. And as you go along through the book of Genesis, we find out in Genesis 12, this promised one will come from Abraham. Then we go a little further, we find out he's going to come through Isaac. Then we find out he's going to come through Jacob. Then we find out he's going to come from the tribe of Judah. Then we find out he's going to come from the family of Jesse. Then we ultimately find out he's going to come from Jesse's son, David. So Satan's plan A throughout the Old Testament was to wipe out the Jewish people so that the Messiah could not be born from them, and ultimately really to wipe out the Davidic line so this Messiah couldn't be born. So you see throughout the Old Testament, persecutions, pogroms, trying to wipe out the Jewish people. There's an old saying I heard someone say years ago. They said, have you ever noticed that every time Satan tried to wipe out the Jewish people, they end up with a holiday? Satan tried to wipe out the Jews through Pharaoh, and of course they ended up with Passover. He tried to wipe them out in the book of Esther, through Haman, and they ended up with the Feast of Purim. During the intertestamental period, the time between the Old and New Testament, Satan tried to wipe out the Jews through a Syrian king named Antiochus Epiphanes. Of course, the Jews ended up with the Feast of Dedication or Hanukkah or the Feast of Lights. And Satan tried to wipe out the Jewish people in the 1930s and 40s in Nazi Germany, and they ended up with May the 14th of 1948, the rebirth of the modern state of Israel. But Satan has hounded and harassed the Jewish people throughout their history. So he tried to keep the Messiah from coming, but of course Jesus was born. He lived a sinless life. He died a sacrificial death. He rose from the dead. And since that time, Satan has been on what I call Plan B, where he's trying to wipe out the Jewish people so that God's promises cannot be fulfilled. God has promises that the Jewish people are going to be in their homeland and that Jesus will come back and rule and reign over them. And so during the tribulation period, this plan of Satan is going to reach its crescendo through the Antichrist, who's going to try to wipe out the Jewish people once and for all. We read about it in Daniel 7, where it says he's going to wear out the saints of the Most High. We read about it in Daniel chapter 12, where the woman there that pictures Israel is chased into the wilderness for 3.5 years, the last half, that last 3.5 years of the tribulation period by Satan. The whole world's going to join in. Zechariah 12 tells us all the nations will gather against Israel. So this age-long hatred of the Jewish people is satanically inspired, and it's going to increase, and it's going to reach its acme or its zenith during the tribulation period. But one final thought here is, in a really ironic way, anti-Semitism proves the truth of the Bible. It proves that God has a future for national Israel, for the Jewish people. And it tells us that Satan knows the Bible, and he actually takes Bible prophecy literally, which is a lot better than a lot of people today who spiritualize and allegorize the Bible. Satan knows and believes and takes it literally that there's going to be a literal future for the Jewish people in the land of Israel. So he wants to wipe them out and to thwart God's plan from ever coming to fruition. So as Bible believers, you and I need to stand with Israel. We need to stand with the Jewish people in these last days, especially as anti-Semitism is on the rise. Well, thanks for watching today. Right now, we're going to go into a subscriber-only portion of the program, where I'm going to answer some really great questions from our endtimes.com subscribers. Again, I'm going to answer a question about angels. Answer a question about what happened to people who died before Jesus died on the cross. If you'd like to access the answers to these questions and a lot of other great material that's archived, you can go to endtimes.com to sign up. Only $7 a month. You can get access to this show and, again, all of the archives that are there. So I encourage you to become a subscriber. And for those of you who are already subscribed, let's dive into these questions.